Welcome back to ShopDog-Garage. We did a short yesterday showing that this worked. So if I move the reluctor, see that little chunk of metal on the reluctor passing the pickup triggers that HEI module and it fires a spark. And that is literally all it needs to do. So as that's spinning, each of these goes past that magnet, and it's timed, of course, and it creates a spark. And of course this, depending on where it's located, will pick which spark plug wire, which is why your firing order matters, and then bam. So in this case, it's a Ford, so you know it spins the wrong bloody way. Also, they do goofy things with their firing order or their cylinder count because Fords always 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So if this was a 4-cylinder, it'd just be 1, 2, 4. If it was a V6, it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They're funny like that. He doesn't count down the plane, just down one side, down the other. So I always keep track. And if I recall, this platform actually has 2 different firing orders. So the cams could be different. So definitely always verify that you have the correct firing order for your small block Ford. Okay, and you can see here, off of the ignition switch, we have a wire that comes down. If this was a 2.3 liter, it would go to this transistorized setup. If it was, I believe, a 1.8 or something like that, it goes through an ignition resistor. To drop it down to, 6, 8 volts in that range, and then to fire the coil. So what I want to find is this black yellow wire, see the gauge of it, and go from there and decide how much current that can source. ShopDog and I are tracing things. Remember we were looking at schematics a minute ago? So we're actually checking the black red wire against this mess here. Doesn't matter right now, because I need to know if I'm going to have power in both crank and run. So right now, key is off. Key's an accessory. See, no ignition switch because you don't want the coil running in accessory. Key is an on. So we have continuity. And I'm in crank and have continuity. That wire will run ignition. So that's good to know. Also, I turned the key off and pulled it a little bit because you forget about stuff like that, and then when you're playing with power later, things start happening. Alright, remembering that I hate to drill extra holes, so I'm going to reuse this hole, from the old MSD as our power point. So that's going to come from here, go to the cab, and around to the battery. It's also going to be the power source. Not sure. It may wind up being the power source for the fan stuff and the water pump stuff, but it may not. That may actually come off of the battery itself. It depends on where all that wiring winds up physically. Anything I don't have to pass back and forth, I don't want to. So just kind of trying to map all this out before I commit to anything. This obviously is my ignition feed. That is going to splice up here. I think I'm going to remove quite a bit of this. There's no reason for it to be the way it is. And anything I can get away from these headers, I'm going to. So, just kind of trying to work this out. I don't know if this is the way the factory built all this stuff or if somebody did this. I have a feeling that's factory, though. ShopDog just got busted. He was licking his foot because, he gets that way. So I figured one of the things I could start with is take wires I'm not going to touch and start looming them. And that just gets them out of the way. So I'm going to get these, the horn relay, kind of get all that loomed in towards the fuse panel. And that should help kind of make it not look as spooky. ShopDog's tattling. He says that I've been boring. Now, remembering that we're not changing any of the wire. Well, I'm going to fix this little ground that he added because they changed which fog lights were there. But other than that, not making changes there. So we had only pulled that harness apart to inspect it and to pull out stuff we didn't need. So when this all gets closed back up, it'll be fine. So we've got it taped off with harness tape. And you can see what I'm trying to do here. Well, this will pop back through. But I'm trying to use this existing hole and this existing hole for some of those wiring brackets. And then I've still got to tape that up because remember, you know, right here we've got that washer pump. And I'm just trying to kind of keep everything out of my ignition. And then this wire is going to wind up bundled in this harness. So is the tack wire, which is this black one. And the tack wire will go to a connector somewhere in here-ish. And this will go to a connector much closer. The wire is actually in really good shape here. Right here, somebody had folded it or something and it feels funky and I don't like it. So I'm going to splice way up here. Not going to bother with a connector on that because we're connectorized at that end. But we're going to get a good hard splice here. Probably crimped and soldered. So we'll go from there. Just kind of working this all out. And I know in the past I talked about using these maxi fuses because God knows I'm starting to really accumulate them because for whatever reason American Auto Wire has started throwing these things in the kits and I hate them. You know, one, I mean, what are we doing here? Making freaking cars that jump in the air? I mean, this is crazy town. You know, this is cable. So, not a big fan of this. I don't like the big giant 175 amp maxi fuses for almost every classic car project we're working on. This is just silly. It's overkill for no reason whatsoever. Also, you got to mount these giant fuse blocks somewhere. It's hideous. It doesn't really go with the vibe. So I don't use these. So I'm starting to accumulate a few of them. What I usually do is, you know, even though I just spent $1,000 on a box of wire, I'll spend another 40, 50 bucks getting the rest of the wires I actually need, you know, for the GM alternator kits. And that's going to get me the one fused link and the dash 8 wire for my alternator lead. And then if I dig around somewhere, I'll have a fusible link that I normally run off the starter stud for the cabin, which obviously won't be from the starter stud. I think I showed you all of that when we were working on the Henry J. So if I don't have one, I will get one, but I think that's how we're going to do it. I think we're just going to go with the fusible links for this. Originally, I really thought about doing this for this project, and that's just ridiculous. You know, this is already going to be overkill. So, yeah, let's go with what makes sense. And this is the part where I've got to make some decisions on how I want to do this. Right now, I'm treating that like it's the stud on the starter, you know, just like I would do on a GM. And this will feed the cabin. And this is the protection from the alternator. So if there's a hard short, you know, the alternator can fuse its link. And then traditionally it's a, you know, like 4 or 2 gauge wire from the battery down to the starter. You know, this is where it would normally feed for those. I'm not doing that on this car. That is a nightmare down there. So I probably will just bring this wire, you know, because this will be pretty short, out, around, follow it around. And then on the battery, we all know that I like to have these little adapters. Guess I should have had this pre-opened, but, you know, doesn't matter. There we go. So looking at this, I can have heavy gauge for the starter, heavy gauge over to that alternator stud, and then a port for the water system. So that, which is going to handle the fan and do all the water stuff. So as we deal with that, you know, so those are probably going to be wired here, which means I'm going to try to find some way to deal with the relays that are necessary for the water pump system over there. because, you know, we've got that power feed that comes from this controller. You remember, we get in here, there's a whole mess of wiring for this. But I'm trying to treat this as a separate system. You know, I want it to be its own standalone system. It's not going to be tied into any other system in the car. It's only going to get the signals it needs to run. And it's going to be completely independent because, you know, in the future, if someone does something different and, you know, a water pump goes back in or a different engine or whatever, that system is on its own. We're going to go away from what Ford did. That's literally the way Ford did it, is, you know, this was their fusible link here. And that was the only protection for all of that. So the other thing I think I've definitely got to do is get this connector out of here. I don't see any reason to have it. We're not using anything except the starter trigger. So I think we should splice that in. There's no reason not to. This car isn't factory serviceable. I do not remember what those were. They've been previously trimmed, and I don't remember if I did it or someone else did it. It doesn't matter. We're obviously not using those circuits. I bet those had something to do with bypass during crank for ballast resistors or something along that line. Yeah, this is getting much, much simpler as far as getting all of this back together. I want to get the car all back together and pretty much working, and then deal with the water pump system. I really want to make sure all these other circuits are working correctly. I may even hook things up and just try to get it started under this condition, just to make sure that everything is working and that I don't have any problems. So that obviously isn't going to happen today. Anyway, that's what I'm thinking about. All right, this is starting to come together. I'm going to zoom you in. Okay, so we now have a fusible link crimped and soldered. So there's a U crimp there and then soldered in. And as soon as it's cool, I will slide its protector on. That's going to fall in here. That's the feed to the cab. Okay. We have a wire with some heat shielding here for the alternator. It also has its fusible link. And then we have our feed over here. And that will go to that terminal on the battery. This is going to work out a little nicer than what was there before. I think while I have my soldering iron out, I will also go ahead and take care of this and kind of bring this together, because there's really no reason to have this connector now, and it's just one more failure point at this point. It looks like I'm making the right call. See how this is the housing that starter wire went through. See the melt? This got hot. So I'm glad I decided to go ahead and yank that. The bundling is starting to really come together now. You can see we're starting to route sensors. I've still got to do the coil. You know, I'll just make a connector here and we'll do the other end there. You know, so we can still break that easy enough. But you can see this was those two wires that are used in crank. Don't know that we would ever need them again, but we're not going to cut them. There's no reason to cut them off. This whole loom is going to be held by this bracket when we're done. We're getting there. You can see, you know, don't worry about this mess out here. You know, 3 things at a time here. So this was, if you recall, where I was really thinking about routing everything, keep things nice and safe. I'm getting ready to pick up the truck so I can plug in the oil pressure sensor. And remember, we left a nice window there so we'd be able to get it in there. And we'll keep working here, but I think we're really in the ballpark now of how this is going to go. At some point, I'm going to have to time this. We know we're at top dead center. We know we're on the compression or the firing stroke. What we don't have is, you know, where the cap needs to be. They're numbered and everything, and I'd like to keep it factory-ish if possible, because there is actually casted numbers on the cap, and future people working on it may or may not pay attention. So, you know, always think about the future. But yeah, this is going to be way tidier than what was there before. ShopDog has been judging on the work we've been doing. So I don't seem to have any on hand, but we're going to put a piece of that heat shield that's got the Velcro in it on there, and that'll help with the heat rise. I haven't drilled this hole yet. I don't know if I want it like this or how I want it yet, but you know, this is an existing hole. Anyway, that shows the concept. I'm working in my mind how these are going to be up and out of the way. I don't really want to zip tie here. I may zip tie them to each other. Maybe I'll make a little bracket here. Haven't decided. Don't forget, this isn't tight because I'm changing that. Obviously, the carburetor isn't even mounted, so that wouldn't matter anyway. There's a bit to do yet, but we're getting close. So don't worry about any of this wiring over here yet. This covers most of what we've got to do here. Now, when this guy gets installed, I am still going to need a ignition trigger, but conveniently, I think I got some spots I can grab for that. You know, so like I said before, I want that to be its own setup, its own system. So we will run the ignition trigger, a new wire, and we'll splice that in where it needs to be. But until we get to that point, I'm not worried. Oh, and I did do the tack here. All of those are going to get bundled, and I'm going to use these holes here to kind of keep things tidy and out of the way. And then when this guy's in, I think you're not going to notice most of it anyway. So see, that'll kind of hide that a little. So that'll look really, really nice, I think. And with that, ShopDog says he's getting a little tired. He's been working too hard. There hasn't been enough pretzels, that's for sure. So we're going to call it. It's time to go make some dinner. It's a lot later than I expected it to be, but there have been a few phone calls, so I know I didn't shoot quite as much footage as I probably could have. I'm pretty happy with where this is going. Everything seems to be a lot tidier, especially when I can get some heat shielding here. I just remembered I'm still going to have to source a wire for the electric choke because that was being run off the coil for some reason, and I'm not sure I like that option. So we're going to take care of that. Obviously, I still need to switch the ignition for the water system, but I'm treating that as a separate thing for right now. At this point, I'm pretty happy with where all of this is. You know, maybe in a few weeks, we will be able to actually just give this a run before we put the cooling system in and verify that we're happy with how everything works, that we've got the timing close enough, nothing's having problems, that the charging system is working. So that may be the direction I go. So definitely keep watching to find out if that's what we wind up doing. But at this point, thanks for watching.